تمام.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to what was supposed to be the first workshop of today, but now we are midday because of many changes to the program due to in-person and virtual conference. This session is titled Communicating Palestine, a guide to narrate and engage responsibly. It's a workshop, actually, and it sits at the heart of this year's theme for our conference, PIDAF, the battle over the Palestinian digital narrative. Because beyond algorithms and policies, there's a big question, and that's how do we tell our story and how it is told about us. Um, for Palestinians, we know that our words carry a lot of weight. They carry responsibility and risk. Narratives can humanize, but also narratives can distort, decontextualize, and erase. We've seen how certain words, certain framings are repeatedly used in ways that strip Palestinians of agency, of dignity, and of political context. This is exactly why this workshop and the work that was done behind it is so important. We are joined by Asil El-Bajeh, Advocacy Officer at the Palestinian Institute for Public Diplomacy, PIPD. This organization works to reshape the global discourse on Palestine through advocacy, through research, and through narrative interventions. Yesterday, during our first day of PIDAF, PIPD was recognized with the PIDAF Digital Activism Award in acknowledgement of their important contribution to defending and advancing the Palestinian narrative in digital spaces. One of their key initiatives, which Afi will be discussing today, is the Communicating Palestine Guide. It's a practical Palestinian-led resource. It helps individuals and organizations engage with Palestine in ways that are ethical, accurate, and grounded in dignity and agency. In the workshop, Asi will talk us through some key insights from the guide and help us unpack some harmful narrative and visual tropes and offering tools for more responsible and effective communication. Most importantly, we are looking forward to your engagement, to hearing your views, your questions, if you have any, whether you're an activist, a communicator, a journalist, interested in media, or simply engaging on online platforms. This session is for you to engage with. And I end the introduction. Asil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jalal, and thank you, Farhamla, for organizing this important forum and focusing this year's theme on such an important topic, which is Palestinian narratives. And as Jalal said in the introduction, I hope to make this session interactive, so we will leave space at the end of the session for questions and answers. I have prepared a PowerPoint to basically just give an overview of what Communicating Palestine platform is, and go over some of the key tips from the platform around how do we deconstruct harmful narratives when it comes to communicating Palestine. I will share the screen right now, and please let me know, Jalal, if you can see my screen.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so basically, Communicating Palestine is a website, so you can visit Communicating Palestine at communicatingpalestine.org. It is now available in English, but it will be also available in several languages this year, hopefully. And this platform, it's basically a guide that started 5 years ago by a Palestinian collective of Palestinian NGOs and advocacy groups and researchers and journalists who thought that we really, as Palestinian, needs a one place where we can give tips and guidelines on how to communicate Palestine ethically and with dignity. So as you can see in the website right now, it is divided into sections of how do we reframe the Palestinian struggle? How do we identify harmful narratives and deconstruct them? So the section in the in the tool, like the tool box above, you can see the reframing section. It's all about narratives. Then there's the engagement section, which is about how do we engage with Palestinian people. So because communication is not only about what we say and the narratives we use, but it's also about how do we center Palestinian agency and not marginalize their expertise and so on and so forth. And there's also a section about visuals, because communication is also about how do we use the visuals and videos and photos in an ethical way. And then we have a lot of practical tools in this tool section that are more easy to use and practical. So for example, key terminologies and words you should use and not use, how to debunk Zionist propaganda. This is one of the key things in relation to the field of communication that I'm going to be basically presenting on many of the sections in the website today, but we don't have the time. So I invite you all to visit the website after this session to explore further and enrich your communication about Palestine. Also, before we start with the actual guidelines and tips, I want to also share about why this guide is really important, especially at this moment when the Palestinian people are in an ongoing genocide. So we know that the Zionist project, the settler colonial project, is basically ethnically cleansing the people. The main intention of this project is stealing the land, dispossessing the people. But we also know that this is not the only intention. So the fight and the struggle is not only against our bodies and our lands, but it's also about, against our narratives, our voices, our history and identity. So this is why Communicating Palestine is so important. We know that the Zionist project spend and invest millions of dollars in narrative warfare in what is known as Hasbara, which is the propaganda machinery of the official propaganda machinery. They deploy all these lobby groups around the world to silence solidarity voices, to repress and target and smear Palestinians and solidarity voices. At the same time, with this targeting, they also try to whitewash their crimes with the propaganda and lies and disinformation. And we've seen how, and during the genocide, this was even more alarming, this warfare. And that's why the Zionist project is investing more and more money in this regard and effort. So our response as Palestinians and as solidarity people, that we need to be also investing a lot of efforts, not in the sense of countering and defending, but also in terms of being authentic to our narrative and amplifying and reclaiming Palestinian narratives the way they want. Now, the other reason why this platform and this guide is so important right now is that, unfortunately, the problem is not only with the Israel and the Zionist project per se. It is also complicity by different complicit powers and institutions. This stretches from media institutions to politicians and political institutions to even cultural institutions like universities and so on. And the theme of this forum today about digital also complicity in suppressing Palestinian narratives. We also know how tech companies like Meta and others are complicit in silencing our narratives. And so this is why the platform right now is really important. Also, before we start with the actual guidelines, I think what is really also I would say an added value of this platform, because there has been many initiatives by Palestinian groups, by solidarity groups and individuals to try to reclaim and amplify Palestinian narratives. But I would say this is the first comprehensive guide. When you go to the website, you would find all sorts of tips and guidelines to anything related to communication. So as I said, it's not only the words, it's not only the propaganda, it's not only the narratives, it's also how we engage. And it's also have been designed, the platform, to address all sorts of audiences. So if you go to the website, you would see in the homepage, the section Navigate the Guide As. And this is where we have chosen tailored content from the guide, not tailored, specific sections from the guide that would be most relevant to your expertise or field of work. So if you are a media, working in media, or a journalist, you have many sections in the website that you can focus on and read. Same thing if you're an activist, if you are working in the humanitarian field, this is where you can scroll the relevant sections to your field. And the second thing, as I said, this project started well before the genocide, like around 5 years ago. And the approach we took with the research is that we wanted really to, like, not only with words to say we are centering Palestinian narratives and agency, but to rely on the voices of the Palestinian people. So there was a field research process with Palestinians on the grounds in refugee camps, in villages, in towns. More than 570 Palestinians were engaged in the research process. You can find more about this in the methodology section, in the About Us section in the website. But I just wanted to highlight that this platform and guide has been is also reflecting the voices of the Palestinian people. Now, I will be focusing on some harmful narratives that you can find more and read more about in the guideline, that are also relevant to the moment we are living in 2026. And at the end of the session, throughout the presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat right now or note them down, and we will open the floor for questions and answers at the end. So one of the most harmful and repetitive harmful narratives that we hear over and over again, and I think this is one of the most problematic one, because it shapes many other things and policies and understandings of people. So both sidism, or in simple words, portraying the issue as a two-sided conflict, as if there is Israel and there's Palestine, and the two are equal in power, in responsibility, in everything. And the way we see that on social media, in media, and in political spaces, we would see phrases like Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Israel-Hamas war. We would see content from digital content creators encouraging for peace and coexistence between the two sides, because supposedly these two sides are have equal responsibility and power dynamics and so on. And we would see it also in political spaces by politicians. And the reason I'm highlighting that, it is evident in many spaces that in each space the consequences are very dangerous. So for example, in the political space, if you understand and frame the issue as a two-sided conflict, then the solution to that would be negotiations and peace agreements, when the issue should be understood as a colonial conflict, colonial situation, and the solution to it is accountability, is liberation, is justice, and not peace and coexistence. So these are just a few examples. Now, in terms of how do we deconstruct this narrative, this is like a very not professional graphic, but I hope that it will illustrate the idea that when we say expose the context and the root causes of the issue, what do we mean by that? So usually when people portray the issue as a two-sided conflict, they usually stop at understanding the issue as either the manifestation of what is happening, so that there's a home demolition there, and there's settler violence there, and there's like the practices that are happening by the colonial power, but they do not understand it within the structural root causes of it. And this is where the problem is. So this is why in this graphic, you would see that under the ground, there are root causes of what is happening on the ground. What we see on the ground is Palestinians being displaced, genocide happening. But under that, there is systems of oppression. And usually also the understanding by the international community, and sometimes from good intention, would stop at either understanding as a military occupation that is happening in the West Bank and in Gaza, forgetting that the issue is not only in these places or against these fragmented part of the Palestinian people. There's also refugees, millions of refugees outside of Palestine. There's also Palestinians with Israeli citizenship in the so-called State of Israel. And if you end the occupation on the borders of 1967, this is not a solution that would ensure liberation of the Palestinian people and freedom of the Palestinian people. So this is why the same thing with the apartheid. Apartheid is a reality we should recognize, which is about racial discrimination and domination. But also, it is not the only or the last, the overarching framework of how we understand the issue. Because if you stop at there, then the solution to apartheid would be equality, which is only one element of how we perceive the future of the Palestinian people. Because equality is a liberal interpretation of like equality between the settler and the Palestinian, and this is not the solution. So the solution comes when we understand the issue as a settler colonial project that is mainly focused about eliminating really the Palestinian people and stealing the land. And so the solution to that would be a decolonial process where the Palestinian people are free from the river to the sea. So this is a very a long topic that we can talk about for a lot, but I just wanted to give an overview, because in most of the harmful narratives that we would try to deconstruct, this is one of the key issues that we should always focus about, showing the structural violence and how these systems overlap with each other. And always we should frame the situation within the overall, like the overarching settler colonial framework. The other thing, when we try to deconstruct the so-called both-sided conflict, is that we should also show the power imbalance between the colonizer and the colonized. Israel, we know that it is being backed up by powerful states, and not even backed up. Like right now, we see that the genocide and the war on the region is not only an Israeli war, it is a US-Israeli war on the region. We know also that other Western powers are complicit in funding and basically in creating this power imbalance. So we should always highlight this when we try to communicate that it's not a two-sided conflict. One very important thing that we keep encountering also is that when people say it's a two-sided conflict or both parties should be highlighted, there's often a demand for Palestinians or solidarity people to be neutral, right? That you should cover both stories, that you should highlight the so-called suffering of both parties and these kind of things. And this is where we should always reject the demand to be neutral, because you can't be neutral in a situation of colonialism. And it is ridiculous to assume so for the Palestinian people. Like, you can't ask in any other situation of systemic racism and imperialism and so on, you can't ask the oppressed people to be neutral. So this is dehumanizing in itself, and we should reject it by all the time. The last thing with two-sided portrayals and framing is that we should always highlight the three unities, what we call the three unities in our narrative as the Palestinian. So the unity of the Palestinian people, the unity of the land, and the unity of the struggle. What I mean by that is that usually when we portray Palestine, it's usually a lot of focus on the West Bank and Gaza. And this does not mean that's not important, but many people would not know that half of the Palestinian people are actually not in Gaza and not in the West Bank. So we have 15 million Palestinians. Half of them are either refugees outside of Palestine or Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. So this is why we should highlight that this is where the unity of the struggle comes, is that our struggle as Palestinians, as 15 million Palestinians, regardless of where we are and regardless of the intensity of the colonial violence against us, it is against the same project, the colonial project. Also with the land, this is, I think, implied, is that historic Palestine from the river to the sea is where our struggle is, our efforts to resistance is about freeing our land from the river to the sea. Another narrative I would like to highlight is the so-called humanitarian crisis narrative. And we would see this a lot. We saw this a lot during the Gaza genocide, and we still see it. The idea of this narrative is that it would portray Palestine, that there's poverty, there's so-called famine, there's so-called underdevelopment, without saying first why there is this situation, who caused this situation, so that the context would be obscured. And usually in this narrative, you would see Palestinian portrayed as passive victims. So usually you would see images, often overrepresentation of children and women, as if, especially with women, as if Palestinian women are without agency and are not politically active in the struggle. And the problem with this narrative is that, as I said, it shows Palestinians without agency. We are helpless, we are passive, we are not doing anything. And the audience is also not seeing who is causing this situation. And as I said, like narratives and the way we understand any situation in the world would impact how we act on it, even as people with either as people with power or as activists and citizens, basically. So what would the governments do and the humanitarian development sector would do is that they would literally recycle the cycle of colonialism without addressing the root causes. So basically, you would see international humanitarian organizations giving donations for money for like for food, for the demolished homes. They would rebuild a demolished home, while at the same time, many of these governments and institutions would be complicit in the occupation, in either funding the occupation or having diplomatic relationship with the occupation. And this first visual actually illustrates this example perfectly. You can see here government of Finland and UNDP and like all this development sector basically posting about how they not rebuilt in this case, they rehabilitated a schoolyard in Jerusalem, and you can see the absurdity of this picture is that in the background you can see the apartheid wall, and what they did is that they have painted the wall for the children so that the view is a bit better. While the solution to this problem should have been governments imposing sanctions and cutting diplomatic ties and so on and so forth. Instead of, I'm not saying that this is not important to do humanitarian interventions, and because this would address the immediate needs, but always should be complemented with how do we address the root causes. Because if I, as a humanitarian agency, I'm funding a demolished home, and then the next day the Israeli occupying forces would re-demolish it. So the root cause of the system is not addressed, and so we are in this cycle. Also relevant to this narrative of humanitarian crisis victimizing Palestinians, and we've seen this in Gaza a lot, is that there's a lot of from many times coming from good intentions, calls to donations for money to go to people in Gaza. But usually the visuals that are used in these donation campaigns and so on that we post online and reshare, as I said, sometimes from good intention, we need to be careful about that. It's using Palestinians and portraying Palestinians in a very victimized ways, not respecting their agency and dignity. Usually consent is not taken from Palestinians used in these pictures. As you can see, this picture, we have blurred the faces, but this is a campaign coming from a humanitarian organization. And it's usually showing Palestinians in these situations where they're vulnerable. And as I said, dignity is compromised here. So as a conclusion to all of these issues of how do we counter this, let's skip this one. As I said, we should always acknowledge the root causes, that there's occupation, there's blockade, there's genocide. This is the real cause of why there's so-called crisis. We should always name the perpetrator, which is the Israeli system. And if we are in a position of power, we should work to end the situation and address it, not to work around it and to address the symptoms. And if we are activists, this is where our role comes, and advocates, to push for systems of power, for our governments, for the media, anyone who is complicit in this oppression, to basically not only be doing the bare minimum. As an example, a ceasefire, like when the genocide was in its full force, we were calling for ceasefire, but we know that ceasefire would not solve the blockade or the occupation and so on. So always our activism should center around these core systemic issues. And this is one of the key issues here, is when we center Palestinian voices, especially when we're using here visuals. We always say center Palestinian voices, center Palestinian stories. That's right, but we should do it with specific rules. And this is where we should prioritize issues around consent. Even if you're not the one who took the actual picture or the video of the Palestinian, you should ask yourself, like, look at the picture in the previous slide you saw. Do these people in the picture seem that they have consented? If the answer is no, usually don't reshare that photo, because, and also put yourself in the shoes of these people. Would I be comfortable if this is my picture being shared as a billboard in the street or a donation campaign poster? Ask yourself these questions, and if the answer is no, usually this is where you should not post, and you should not basically amplify these stories or visuals or portrayals. A representation, as I said, usually in this narrative, it's usually women and children who are overemphasized in a way that to evoke sympathy. And this is where we should diversify representation. We should respect Palestinian women agency. We should not exploit Palestinian children suffering and trauma and dehumanize them. All of these things we should be thinking about. Dignity is really important here. Palestinians, it's a reality that Palestinians are suffering, but how do we respect the dignity of Palestinians when we want to show the suffering? It's important to show that Palestinian reality is very harsh and genocidal and all of these things. But while showing that, you need to respect the dignity of the people. So don't exploit the suffering of the people for marketing. For example, the case of these donation campaigns. You can still do a donation campaign while respecting the people. I will show now a good example. Or self-promotion, as in, like, usually there's white savior complex when we there's this Western person who's coming to solve and self-promote themselves. So this should never happen. An agency, as in, you should highlight that Palestinian people are not passive. We have never been passive. Palestinians are always resisting, are always steadfast, are always creative, finding creative ways to resist this colonial reality and the crisis. But at the same time here, be mindful that you're not romanticizing the Palestinian people as heroes. I'll come to that in a bit. So this picture here, you can see like a good example. This is a call to donation campaign, right? But instead of showing here, of course, you can see that the Palestinian children here, you can see that they have consented to the pictures. So consent is respected. You can see that they are not passive, they are active, they are active in their communities, helping and so on. So this is an example of how can you fulfill the same purpose without undermining dignity and consent and all these things. This, you can go to the website to visit, but it's basically a comprehensive way for you to decide if the picture you're posting on Palestine or Palestinians is respecting ethics and dignity of the people. It's basically a tree to ask questions, to ask yourself several questions, and then you would conclude if this is the right picture or you should revise or go ahead. So I invite you to visit the website and explore this decision tree. It's in the tools section, photography guide. I think this is one of the last narratives that I want to highlight. So this is something we hear over and over again, and it's not only against Palestinians, that Palestinians are violent, they are terrorists, they are angry, and all of these racist and Orientalist portrayals of Palestinians. And as I said, it's not only against Palestinians. We have seen it, like it has been used by colonial and imperial powers against all oppressed people and indigenous people and people of color. So right now, for example, we're seeing how the US and Israel and most Western powers would portray people in Iran as terrorists, in Gaza as terrorists, in Lebanon. So it's usually against people who are resisting colonial domination. And it's usually Palestinian men or Arab men or Muslim men in these portrayals that are overemphasized. By contrast, that humanitarian crisis, it's usually women and children. Here, we usually see the men, the Palestinian men, the Arab men. And usually, as you can see, like with visual portrayals, you would see faceless people, so you can't see the human behind these people. Crowds, no human stories are portrayed or emphasized. This is, of course, intentional by the media, by politicians, in order to evoke, like for the audience, when they see these images over and over again, they would feel afraid and like really that this is really a threat. They don't know the context, they don't know that there's colonialism, they don't know that there's resistance. And the only image they see of the men, of the Palestinian men, is this image. So how do we counter this? Is basically, I think one of the key things with the narrative, with the terrorist narrative specifically, is that we should never use it, like reject it altogether. Because in Palestine and any other place, it is usually rooted in an imperial racist portrayals of oppressed people. At the same time, we should center how the struggle is never about fighting, because usually there's many Islamophobic portrayals in this narrative, and that it's Jews against Muslims, and it's never that. If our oppressor was a Buddhist, we would fight it. If our oppressor was an atheist, we would fight it. It's not about religion. We are fighting the oppressor because it's a settler colonial occupying power. So we should always center the anti-colonial nature of the Palestinian struggle. Again, show the structural oppression, but also, this is really important. So for example, when we show that there's occupation, there's colonialism, we should also show the reality of Palestinians under this reality. It's been a century, like 100 years of this reality. And the daily life under this reality is that Palestinians are born refugees. Palestinians, their daily life is military raids, bombardment, imprisonment. So all of this, like the logic and the dignity of any people who are subjected to this reality as a daily reality, is to resist. And here we come to the point that resistance is not only logical and dignified, it is also a right for the Palestinian people. By international law, we know that the Palestinian people or any oppressed, colonized, or occupied people have the right to resist by all available means, including armed struggle. At the same time, here we can deconstruct that occupying powers have a so-called right to self-defense. This is not accurate under international law. Occupying powers do not have a so-called right to self-defense. And another thing you can highlight when trying to deconstruct this narrative of terrorism and violence is that Palestinians, even when they tried peaceful ways of resistance, like going to the court, going to the International Criminal Court, being a journalist, civil disobedience, going in protest, all of these other methods are also criminalized and attacked and literally labeled as terrorism. So you can also highlight that. I would like to leave some space for questions and answers, so I would skip this, but the idea of this slide is to basically, so Palestinians would sometimes be portrayed as victims, helpless, violent, terrorists. The other stereotype, the third, would be that we are romanticized as heroes. These like superheroes who can endure anything. And why is this problematic? And this is sometimes coming from solidarity people, even from Palestinians. And here I'm not saying that Palestinians are not strong, are not resisting, are not steadfast, but the problem comes when you overemphasize the Palestinian strength. And in this way, you are implying that Palestinians are not also suffering behind this strength. And you are implying that this is this is a forced reality. So you're not showing that this is forced upon Palestinians to be strong all the time. And so to counter that, you would basically, it would be important, yes, you can show strength, you can show resistance, but it would be also very important to show the costs behind the strength, to highlight that don't stop also only at showing Palestinian strength, because if you do that, the audience would be seeing superheroes and then they would feel a bit comfortable that they don't have to do anything. So it can create apathy, so that you always need to call for action and to say what people can do and how they can contribute to in the struggle for freedom for Palestine. Here, I think this is where you can go to the website. We have a very interesting tool around terminology. So the idea of it is to basically, because narrative is also about the words that we use, and words really matter. How we say, if you say it's eviction versus ethnic cleansing or forced displacement, really is important. So in the guide, you can see under tools also the terminology guide. And these are some examples just to illustrate why these terminologies and their replacements are really important when in our daily conversations and communication on Palestine. So, for example, instead of saying the Arab-Israeli conflict or Israel-Hamas war, you should say this is Israeli occupation or Zionist settler colonialism or genocide or military aggression, depending on the context of the sentence. But basically, the words on the left are words we should always avoid. And you can find more examples in the terminology guide. I'm aware of the time issue and I don't want to miss the time for questions and answers. So I just will end with this, because this is something we encounter a lot in communication as activists and as Palestinians, is, like the tough conversations, being subjected to propaganda, to fallacies, the do you condemn Hamas question and all of these propaganda that we're subjected to. So I just prepared a few tips of how do you spot these fallacies, and then how can you respond, but you can also explore further in the guideline. So first of all, if you're in a debate, if you are in a casual conversation with your colleague or at university, if you're doing a media interview, if you're actively doing lobbying with politicians, so these are the spaces we're usually subjected to these kind of questions that are distracting and that are dehumanizing, that are full of propaganda. So before you answer, I think it's really important to identify the intention behind the question, to see if it's coming from bad faith or it's like a question to really of curiosity or lack of knowledge. And this affects how you answer, because if the intention of the question was lack of knowledge, you can engage in good faith with the other person. But if it's really like in bad faith, and how do you know if it's in bad faith? If you were talking about something and you feel that the other person is trying to distract you, they are trying to corner you, you feel like you're being interrogated, you feel like you are being asked to prove your humanity, or you are asked to delegitimize and condemn your people, this is where bad faith happens. And this is where there's a lot of tactics that we can use to answer these types of arguments and questions. So I'll just give a few examples of what these fallacies are, or bad faith questions or deceptive questions. And we have a tool on fallacies, and spotting them and identifying how these works, because they're usually coming from intention of the person who's asking them to corner you and distract you and all of these things. And they use tactics. So for example, strawman fallacy, it's usually misrepresenting your argument. You will be talking about something like Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. And then the other person would tell you this is anti-Semitic. And this is completely irrelevant to the topic, and it's not correct at the same time. But the person who said you are anti-Semitic is trying to divert the attention from what you were saying to make the discussion about you and attacking you. So you can start saying, no, I'm not anti-Semitic, this is not anti-Semitic. But if you identified what the strategy that they were using, the strategy to respond will not be to defend yourself, because they want you to defend yourself. And the question and the discussion would become about you being the racist one, while their question is racist and their comment is racist. Because how come a discussion about freedom is racist? Like if I say freedom to Palestine and you hear racism, this talks about you, not me. So this is why it's important to identify these tactics, because it can help you to answer these types of arguments and questions. I'll give just another example. So post hoc, for example, fallacy, is usually assuming that because an event starts, follows another, it must be caused by it. So the example we go by is, for example, someone would say, oh, the Israeli blockades only started because Palestinian elected Hamas, or the genocide, they would say genocide, the genocide that you were claiming happened because of 7th of October. So here you can also start replying to them, no, history did not start on 7th October, or not all Palestinians elected Hamas, or you defy the entire logic of their statement by calling out how it's, first of all, very racist, decontextualizing, but also exposing that this is not how logic happens. It's not something happens today and it must have been caused by the other thing. So these are some of this is the last slide, I promise. These are the tactics you can engage with in terms of responding to fallacies. So as I said, if you identify that it's coming from bad faith, reveal the intention of the question. Like say out loud, this is racist, this is doing this, you are trying to distract me, this is not what do not start doing defensive reactions and say, no, I'm not anti-Semitic. Instead, reveal the intention of the question. You can also flip the question. And what this means, I'll give an example of an interview that I love of Muhammad al-Kurd. He was asked by this interviewer, Western channel, I think CNN or something. She was asking him, do you support the violent protests that have erupted in your neighborhood? And that question was happening during the forced displacement in Sheikh Jarrah of his family and his neighborhood. So he flipped the question and he asked her, do you support the violent dispossession of me and my family? So in that way, he's flipping the power dynamics. He's exposing the racist question and all of these things by flipping the scenario. Even if is also a tactic Muhammad al-Kurd talks about in his book that I encourage you to read, Perfect Victims. So, for example, if someone tells you Hamas uses hospitals under Hamas uses human shields under hospitals. So most people or many people would answer this by saying, but no, Hamas does not use human shields under hospitals. Another tactic that you can use is to tell them, but even if Hamas was using, let's pretend that Hamas was using human shields under hospital, does that justify the bombing of the hospital? So in that even if framing, you're basically also exposing what the person asking you this question is implying. They are implying that bombing a hospital is okay. So this is another tactic. Challenge harm without echoing it is basically, because usually someone would tell you, you are terrorist, you are anti-Semitic. You would hear this a lot. And instead of saying, I'm not terrorist, I'm not anti-Semitic, do not echo the same framing, harmful framing they're doing, because you would be giving this framing power. Instead of saying, I'm not terrorist, say, I'm resisting colonial domination. So the audience would be hearing your narrative, not the opponent narrative. And then, of course, with all these tips, always, because propaganda is all about distraction. So the main strategy would be in most question is to redirect to your original question, because many times you would be talking about something and they would hit you with this fallacy to distract you, and you start talking about defending yourself and whatnot. And the main topic that should be focused on is forgotten. So this is where you should always redirect to your original messaging. So I encourage, this is the barcode where you can scan it and visit the website to see more and explore more. And I think we have less than 15 minutes for questions and answers. I'll stop the slides.
Thank you, Asil.
And I'm sorry
that was
that
really
I took
comprehensive.
so much time.
No. No, don't be, because I'm saying it was very comprehensive, and every time a question came up on like practical tips and advice and specific examples, you would then just bring it up yourself. So it was very good in that sense. So I don't want to take time with my own questions. Maybe we can go to the questions from some of the audience. I have 3 questions that we can go through. The first by Giorgio. He's asking if you can elaborate more on the structural context of the colonial narrative. So you touched on this, but maybe you're assuming that it's common knowledge. But like he's talking about structural from a narrative point of view, question mark. For example, what are the narrative elements that construct this context?
Yeah.
So if you could take that as the first question, تفضلي.
Thank you. So basically, in the slides, do you remember this graphic that I showed about the soil and the systems under the soil being settler colonialism, apartheid, and occupation? So this is structural oppression, because demolishing a house is oppression, killing a Palestinian is oppression, but how these practices are happening under systemic oppression is the context. And I would highlight the settler colonial framework as the main one to always talk about structural oppression, which is about, like, we see this, Israel is not the only settler colonial project in the world. The US did that against indigenous people, native people in the Americas. South Africa was a settler colonial project. So it's about, basically, these projects are aiming to steal a land, ethnically cleanse the people and erase them and replace them with a settler population. And this is what the Zionist project is about. So we should always, if you're talking about a home demolition, and this is the only way you talk about, your narrative is framed, it's important to talk about the home demolition, but contextualize it within this system in order for the solutions and the advocacy and the way we advocate to be grounded in solutions around liberty instead of being grounded around solving the symptom of the issue.
Thank you, Asil. That should be very clear. The second question I will take is from Fadi. So Fadi, I think he is diaspora himself. So he's asking, what would you say is the role of Palestinians in the diaspora throughout all of this? Is it to educate, to amplify the voices of those under occupation, or something else?
Role of Palestinian. Yeah, I think this is really important. And I think the main point is, how do we understand ourselves as Palestinians, ourselves as one people? So Palestinians, whether they are in Lebanon or in Chile or in the US, or I'm in Ramallah or someone else is in Gaza, we are all fighting the same colonial power. So we're not standing in solidarity per se with each other. So I think we should emphasize this to the audience, also to the people who are contributing to the Palestinian struggle, that we are one unit as Palestinian people. And I think, of course, like amplifying it's usually around amplifying the voices of the people on the ground. So even if I'm based in Palestine, I would usually amplify the people who are impacted most and what is relevant right now, what is urgently needed right now. So usually, connect with each other, educate, and try to build solidarity with other people. I think the added value also of Palestinians outside of Palestine is how do we, because you are exposed more to other people and other struggles and other oppressions around the world. So also, how do we build solidarity with these people and learn from each other, because our struggles are interconnected. So for example, if you're in the US, right now there's the public, the American public is more and more being understanding and sympathetic to the Palestinian struggle, because they understand that the systems of oppression are interconnected. Israel is training the US police to brutalize Black communities. The companies that are extracting the resources in the US are the same that are basically killing and surveilling Palestinians. So always connect these dots to the people who are trying to join the struggle, so that there's also more strength and power in our struggle.
Thank you. That's also very useful. I hope Fadi finds it useful. Last question I'll take is from Sebastian. And Sebastian is maybe asking a very common question. He or she, they live in Austria, and they find that the only people who are sympathetic and willing to listen are other immigrants and a small minority of native Austrians. I think this problem is also found elsewhere, that you feel like the rest of the population is too brainwashed. So he's asking, what advice would you have for someone to stay sane while they're trying to talk to these people?
Yeah, I do not envy you. It's really hard for Palestinians and for people in solidarity to try to navigate all these. I would say, in many times coming from racist perceptions of Palestinians or other oppressed people. But I would say that the main thing, like, know who your audience is most of the time, because there's people who would be standing on the right and on the left, on the center. So on the right, you know that these are dead end audiences to your intention. And I think if you engage with them, you would be draining your energy. So here you can identify who is your audience. The people on the center would be there, basically not standing with Palestine is coming from lack of knowledge and not racism per se. This is where you can engage with these kind of people, and it would not, I would say, drain you and your energy. And I would say also always like surround yourself, but by other communities, because as I mentioned before, our struggles are interconnected. So if the native Austrians and like the people fighting for immigrants' rights and climate change, like all these issues that are intersected, surround yourself with these movements and these people, so that you also don't feel yourself drained while trying to advocate for Palestine.
Thank you, Asil. We do have maybe 4 minutes before we have to close. So I'd like to maybe just mention that there's also a couple of other points in the chat. One of them by Jana, she's wondering about, Lebanese conflict and Zionist communication. That's another huge thing that's ongoing right now, but I think it's all related. There's also Yasar Zeb, and he finds the answer about diaspora very useful, and he's asking about, how do we work to raise awareness amongst us as diaspora? But also with this, I'd like to just give you the floor to, final comments and close this session from your end. Asil, you have 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Jalal. So actually, one thing that I did not mention about Communicating Palestine Guide is that it's actually very relevant to many situations around the world where there's issues of imperialism, colonialism, racism. So what's happening right now in Lebanon, in Iran, in other places in the world, you can see how the Israeli and US propaganda do the same tactics of narrative manipulation. And so many of the tips that you would find in the guide addressing the situation in Palestine would be applicable to the situation in Lebanon or Iran or other places. On the issue of, I see in the question, also in the chat box, around recommendations on narratives advocating for the two-state solution. Yeah, I think this is one of also the mainstream perceptions when it comes to Palestine, that like even from good intentions, sometimes solidarity people would be usually asking one state solution or two-state solutions. And the problem with that, I think, is that we wouldn't ask any other oppressed people in any other part of the globe, give them two options, first of all, of their future, as if these are the only options. And this would not be the issue of such debate, not to be a debate in policy circles and international community and Westerns, while it should be purely a Palestinian decision. And this is where we would emphasize Palestinian self-determination. Jalal and I can't decide what is the future for the Palestinian people, but the 15 million Palestinian people should decide what is the future for the Palestinian people. And this is where you would, as like narrative deconstruction, highlight that it is really important to that Palestinian right to return is implemented. Palestinian refugees return to Palestine. Palestinian self-determination is respected. We, as Palestinian people, decide our political future. And beyond this, I would say like the two-state solution is not only dead, it does undermine and it does disrespect the Palestinian people collective rights, mainly what I mentioned, the right of return and the right of self-determination. And I think usually the narrative around the two-state solution would distract from the main issue, that our struggle is around advocating for freedom. It's not a statehood issue. It's not our struggle is not to achieve statehood per se. It's let's first be free and deconstruct all the structural oppression and process of decolonization, return of refugees, etc. And then manifestation of that is statehood and independence.
Thank you, Asil. Thank you a lot. This was really informative, and I think I've learned a lot myself, and I'm sure others in the audience learned a lot. This is just a presentation about the guide. Yani, if there's a chance for everyone to, after finishing this, seek to read the whole Communicating Palestine guide themselves and share with those who think this might be an interesting or beneficial or useful resource for them. This is a common resource and something that we should collectively benefit each other from. Thank you a lot for your time, Asil. Thank you all for joining us, and we will be wrapping up. You can move to other workshops after this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for Hamlin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.